Serious Reddit, what is your most memorable interruption of a meeting? Story 1. I was in an interview for an internship after my junior year of college. It was kinda one of those interviews that was less what are your credentials, and more when can you start. Knowing this, I was feeling pretty confident, and really not too nervous about it. This changed though when my interviewer began glancing around and shifting uncomfortably. He was a pretty big guy, so every slight readjustment in his chair was fairly noticeable. It seemed like there was something I had said or done that had suddenly made him visibly distressed. As if everything was going well, but then I just offhandedly made a grossly inappropriate comment, like a race joke or something, like I had just said something that was wildly out of line, and just blew right past it. I wondered what it was. I honestly couldn't think of anything. Maybe I was a little too friendly with him. Could that be perceived as being a somewhat unprofessional? The interview went on for 5 more minutes as I sat there and thought about what I could have possibly done, and tried my best not to do it again. Rather abruptly in the middle of my speaking my interviewer stood up, and promptly his pants. His pants. It was a stunning moment. It seemed like he might have suddenly realized that he was dealing with a very time-sensitive situation, and was frantically trying to get somewhere. But frenzied panic, the basic motor functions of standing up so quickly simply forced it out. It all happened very quick to be honest. One moment I was explaining how my time as a summer camp counselor had taught me valuable leadership skills, and a half-second later my interviewer was on his feet standing in his own. The drastic shift and left me completely speechless, shocked and speechless. I literally did not know how to respond to the situation. My mock interviews in college had seemingly skipped over this particular instance. All things considered, he handled it okay I guess. He turned to his office mate and asked her to complete the interview. Oh, did I mention that he shared an office with an elderly accounting lady, who was an eyewitness to the entire ordeal as well? So long story short, she finished out the interview and I got the job. Story 2. We were having an all-hands meeting a couple of years ago, and several people as always had dialed in on the phone. They ask everyone to mute themselves, of course, but someone always doesn't. In the middle of our director addressing all 600 of us, you suddenly hear a car horn on the phone, followed by "Stay in your lane." Director just stopped, laughed, and then said as a reminder, it is strictly against policy for any employee to use their phone while driving a car. Once I was walking down the hallway tossing raisins into my mouth for a quick snack and one bounced off my lip, across the floor, and into an office where people were having a meeting. I knew they saw it bounce through the door because it was a big raisin and they stopped talking, but they couldn't see me yet as I had not walked by the doorway yet. My office was past their door, so I knew that they would see me eventually as I walked by to get to mine. So I had to make a choice: 1. Retrieve the raisin and admit my mistake, 2. Pretend the raisin didn't come from me and walk past, potentially become known as Raisin Boy behind my back. I chose to retrieve the raisin and apologize, but it turns out they didn't even see the raisin bounce in, so to them I kind of just wandered into the room, picked up a raisin from the ground, apologized, and left. I felt like I was in Seinfeld. TLDR interrupted a meeting to retrieve my runaway raisin. Edit gold. I always knew that raisin story had potential. Zakomo Kwambili. Thank you very much in Chichewa. Story 3. We were in the middle of a presentation to an important client and my coworker, who was doing most of the talking, had a pen burst in his front shirt pocket. Now this wasn't a huge leak, but it was a light-colored shirt and everyone noticed, so he excused himself to take care of it. Anyway, we carry on in his absence and he comes back not more than 5 minutes later and sits down. I turn to look at him and the small blob of ink has since been replaced by a huge, washed-out stain covering about half of his chest. It's impossible not to notice, but we all do our best to keep it together and not laugh. That is, until someone says, "I can see your nipple." Story 4. We were having a meeting about a piece of process equipment, and how we should replace it soon before it fails. Maud Facehoof. Around that moment an engineer walked in and announced that the piece of equipment in question had just failed. Story 5. Healthy-looking middle-aged lady died mid-meeting. Just slumped over, supposedly caused by a brain aneurysm. Really drives home the pointlessness of it all. Story 6. When I worked at Taco Bell, we were having a quarterly staff meeting to talk about general issues and staff changes, as well as new items coming out. XL Chalupa, if I remember correctly. This meeting was happening at 7 a.m., to avoid having to deal with customers being in the lobby as well. A lot of people were annoyed, but I didn't mind because I was getting paid, and I got to try the new chalupa anyways. Halfway through, one of the manager's water broke. She, like all of us, were unaware that she was pregnant. We all just thought she was fat, so needless to say, she missed her shift that night, and I ended up covering it. Still a pretty good meeting, because of the above-mentioned free chalupa. Glad I didn't have to mop that morning. Story 7. Years ago, I was in a conference call with all our branch offices, maybe 14 people in the room, and another dozen or so on the call. The co-owner is giving some talk. Right as he pauses, we hear over the conference speaker, "Jesus, this meeting is bullshit." The co-owner is a very imposing gentleman, and you can tell his blood is boiling. "Who the said that?" he screams. There's dead silence in the room. "Who the said that?" he repeats again. Dead silence in the room and on the conference call. He eventually calmed down, even though no one admitted to the gaffe. We think our technician simply forgot to mute his mic, but we were never able to figure out who it was. Edit for the record, the meeting was bullshit. I had a crappy boss that loved meetings. In one of them, her and this other guy got into a discussion, and after about 15 minutes I said, "Can I leave? This has nothing to do with me and I have work to do." The other 20 people in the room thanked me privately and said they couldn't believe I didn't get fired. Story 8. I was pretty new to the company and was at my 3rd or 4th department meeting. There was another manager there, a very attractive woman my age. Well, she sits down at this meeting in a rush. She was the last to arrive. She was carrying a bottle of seltzer water with her to drink. She opens the seltzer and it explodes over the entire conference table, soaking all of us. I laughed, she laughed, some others laughed and some didn't. You'll never forget it. I asked her out about 2 months later. Now our daughter is a junior in high school. Story 9. I worked at a law firm that was doing a meeting of the senior attorneys and their associates. Some of the senior attorneys were traveling and had to conference in. Hey Race, how that went, Roger? Okay, it looks like we're missing Jim. Can someone get him on the phone? Tom, I think I remember his number. You'll call him on my cell. Tom dials number. Roger, hello. Is this Jim? This is Roger calling about the meeting. Person on phone. No, this is Dave. Who the is Jim? Roger, sorry. Looks like I have the wrong number. Person on phone. Yeah, looks like it. Dave hangs up. Tom, maybe I misdialed. Let me try again. Tom dials number. Roger, hey Jim. This is Roe. Person on phone. Fuck you, Roger. I already told you my name's Dave. Click. Story 10. It was a government video conference call meeting. Coffee, tea and snacks had been provided on a small table. A lady gets up to get something and starts screaming that the cup was filled with hundreds of baby spiders. Story 11. A woman in tactical purchasing answering her phone, which was on full volume, mid-meeting with 2 vice presidents, 3 facility managers, and 3 department heads present. She did not leave the room, and proceeded to discuss her child's recent suicide attempt and current prescriptions for like 15 minutes. No one had the heart to interrupt her, so we just sort of postponed the meeting until she finally hung up. Half the room had left by that point. Extremely awkward. Story 12. I was in a meeting with a potential client. After answering all his questions, demonstrating my experience and outlining my service, he tried the ultimate power move. I can get someone to do this for half the price. I'm not willing to pay your full fee. This is what he'll pay. You're now going to tell me why I should choose your services based on that. Looked him in the eye, said you shouldn't and walked out. Never settle for less than you're worth, folks. Story 13. Middle of a meeting last year, the lady speaking passed out and hit the floor, microphone still in hand. We helped her up. After 10 minutes she resumed speaking. She blacks out again, we help her up. She continues to finish the meeting while laying on the floor. Story 14. We were in our weekly meeting and heard a huge boom, similar to thunder, but louder and longer. Everyone ran to the window and the car detailing shop next to us was in flames and pieces of the building were strewn about everywhere. They evacuated our building and I got the afternoon off, and miraculously no one died. Story 15. Suspected miscarriage during a meeting. Felt suddenly wet and excused myself with obvious wet patch on clothes and seat. Was about 3 months pregnant. I held it together until nearly the end of the meeting and explained to my boss, who was in another room, that I was bleeding and had stayed at meeting to finish my contribution, but I was now going home as I suspected a miscarriage. I had miscarried before and didn't expect this to be any different, and so I didn't get emotional or attached and was able to deal with what I thought was happening. I still don't know what happened that day, but she hung on and will be 9 pretty soon. Story 16. I was at a job interview and the interviewer had to go because Mike Pence randomly showed up in the building. Edit. She left to deal with local media, not to meet the guy. Story 17. Where I used to work, we had a 9 a.m. Pacific Time Wednesday morning meeting. It was that early because half the team was in California, half was scattered around the East Coast, and one person was in Belgium, so it was early for the West Coast, so it wouldn't be too late for the guy in Belgium. The main company office was in California. This was a mid-sized startup with the usual startup culture, and so most people got in around 10:30. Usually the office was pretty empty for our meeting. I was one of the remote attendees. At about 9:45, the CFO interrupts the meeting and awkwardly asks 4 of the 7 people to come with him. Weird. Then a minute later, he comes back to the remaining 3. He starts by apologizing and saying they were supposed to grab them when they came in, but they were the first ones in. He also apologized that he was about to tell them this as a group, but he wanted to lay it out those 3 had been laid off. Why do I know this? Because in the room they had a shared document pulled up on the screen instead of the teleconference. The CFO didn't know they were still broadcasting. Right after the CFO mentioned the layoffs, our Belgium attendee asked, "So I'm guessing we should leave?" I immediately signed off when he said that so that they wouldn't see that ID waited that long. Story 18. 2 come to mind. The first was an exiting CTO who was leaving under some scandals. I started in the company while he took a month of sick leave after it was discovered he had bought equipment from our company to use for his personal business. He was apparently a pretty easygoing guy, but as his time started to dwindle, he became more impulsive and irrational. One day, my boss was going over some stuff with us techs about some new procedure. So you see, this chart shows how we intend to integrate the CTO ran into the meeting room, Kramer style, and drunkenly announced, anyone who buys a domain in a foreign country needs to see me before they pay with US funds. Not a finger. And then he paused and ran out of the room. So this integration will reduce time needed for cross-department approvals. My boss continued, as if nothing had happened. Another one was a CTO having a huge meeting. The meeting room was packed to the walls, with dozens more on speakerphone. Sometimes, someone dials in, puts the meeting on their speakerphone, and forgets to hit mute, and when someone's not paying attention, they don't hear someone screaming to put their call on mute. So you'd hear kathumpa of a keyboard and brengg of their private message client at full volume. But you couldn't call anyone out because you didn't know who was doing this out of the dozens that called in. This meeting, it was bad. The CTO started talking about possible downsizing. Some idiot was on the phone. Kathumpa thump brengg kathumpa breeing. Will someone on speakerphone hit their mute button, screamed the CTO. Kathumpa thump brengg. Then we heard a cell phone ring. Yellow. Yes, hi Tom. Oh, nothing. What's you up? So we heard this guy talk to his friend about a new BMW he bought, and how he Jewed the salesperson down for a deal. The CTO was Jewish, and now super pissed off. He hung up on the call after telling anyone to listen to call back in later. He grilled departments to see who recently got a new car. Quickly, the new BMW owner was located in a distant office 20 miles away. He was banned from using a speakerphone and had to drive in for every meeting and report in person. Story 19. Coworker. Hey, there's donuts. Other coworker. Don't take the cream-filled one. It's the boss' favorite. Coworker takes cream-filled donut, takes a bite, smiles at boss. Boss walks over, reaches across the boardroom table, grabs said donut, and mushes it in the coworker's face, sits down and resumes meeting. Story 20. Spoiler alert, it was a false alarm. I don't want anyone around with my overly dramatic story. But, I was alone in my office on a conference when over the intercom a polite female voice said, I will never forget these words. Attention, all company name staff. Armed intruders have gained access to the building. I remember thinking this has got to be a drill, but it was at a weird time for a drill. Shortly after 1 p.m. many people were still at lunch, so I took it seriously and hung up the phone, locked my door, grabbed some scissors. I know, but Jesus, I had to have something. My friends really laughed at me for it, dicks. And hid in a corner behind a big cabinet. It was eerily quiet for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I texted some friends who I knew were still out at lunch to not come back to the office. Eventually 10 to 15 minutes later, another announcement was made that there was no threat and the building was safe. It turned out that the security staff were updating the emergency announcements, and one of the guys I joke you not bumped the armed intruder announcement. Whoops. While thankfully it was a false alarm, it was not a small event. Some people were truly terrified. A couple of people collapsed and had to be taken to the hospital. My favorite detail of the whole thing was that it was a lockdown strategy. Our building, it turns out, had automated steel doors that would slam shut and protect anyone in the wings until the police cleared the building, assuming, you're not trapped in there with a dude with an AK-47, so it was not an evacuation strategy. That said, there were numerous stories of our vice presidents running out of the building like George Costanza. So much for leadership. In follow-up meetings, the security team stressed that, since there are only a few obvious points of exit from the building, they make for perfect kill zones, so don't do that. Story 21. In a corporate training, and my assistant manager let out a huge SNORRRT as he fell backwards in his chair and crashed through a closet door. He had fallen asleep. Story 22. One of my employees was dialing in from home and hadn't muted his phone. You could hear his dog occasionally barking in the background. A couple people chimed in. Well, Rex clearly agrees with that decision. He didn't get the hint. Then one of his kids starts banging pots and pans together and he finally realized he should mute. We're a pretty relaxed bunch and it was an internal call, no clients on the line, so it was an okay time for him to learn that lesson. Story 23. I didn't do the interrupting, but I did cause the interruption. My dad used to be a pastor at a church when I was much younger. One night they were having a meeting about how it was important for the church to have liability insurance, particularly if someone were to get hurt on the church's property. My older brother and I were playing in the children's area with my mom when this was happening. Somehow I ended up falling into a door frame and splitting my forehead open. My mother runs into the meeting with me while I had blood all over my face. All the elders and my dad start freaking out, and we end up going to the hospital. The church bought insurance the next day. TLDR, I became an object lesson on why insurance is important. Story 24. I was the interruption. A coworker of mine and I had agreed that we were going to jointly explore other employment opportunities. We also agreed that we wouldn't tell anyone else at our company that we were doing this, because we were firmly of the opinion that if management found out, they would summarily fire the both of us. One day, about 6 weeks into our round of interviews with potential future employers, I walk into my coworker's office to find our company's president, who worked in another office and never visited our office, along with another senior member of the company, both of whom immediately stop talking to my coworker, turn and face me. I apologize, walk back out, and close the door. Walking back to my office, I feel a little lightheaded, but I quickly sync my contacts with my Palm Pilot. Look it up, kids, stash that in my briefcase, dump the contents of my physical Rolodex again, look it up into my briefcase, and then wait for the inevitable. Which did arrive, in the form of those very same officers, who came into my office and fired me. I stood up, shook both their hands, thanked the president who had originally hired me for the opportunity, and then my coworker and I left the office, and got on a plane to our largest client, whose business we secured by 1000 a.m. The next day, along with a new company at which to land ourselves in that work, I later came to find out that all of this was triggered because my coworker found it necessary to share our job search details with the secretary of the EVP of the company, who immediately notified the EVP, who notified the president, who fired our asses. Not the most fun I've ever had in life, but definitely the most memorable meeting I ever interrupted. Story 25. Not my meeting, and memorable but not in a good way. I worked at a small company, just 3 people. I answered the phone one random afternoon and the caller, someone I was familiar with, asked for my boss. I said the usual line about being in a meeting and can I take a message. He said interrupt him now please. Caller was not prone to drama, so I suspected it was important and got my boss. He was calling to tell us a photographer we'd worked with was killed alongside another photographer while working in Libya, one of the most surreal days of my working life. Story 26. In high school, I had joined a Boy Scouts Explorers post at the local newspaper. A reporter had started up the group with a BSA and was teaching a bunch of high schoolers how to be reporters. We met at the paper weekly, and the paper gave us a page periodically that we were able to fill with whatever content we wanted within obvious reason and generally accepted newspaper standards. At the weekly meeting, and the topic that week was press conferences, specifically how to ask what kinds of questions to get whatever information you need to get. So the reporter had dressed up as a baseball player and was giving a press conference for being the first woman to be signed to a Major League Baseball team. We were firing off questions and she was answering and all was going well. With zero warning, of course, a bearded guy busted into the room screaming at her about something she'd done to him off. He grabbed her and took her out of the room, so all we could hear was him yelling and her screaming and we were all frozen 15 and 16-year-olds wondering WTF to do. Finally, they both came back into the room laughing. It was all a setup to teach us about our observational skills. What did the guy look like, what was he wearing, what was he yelling about, etc. That was a powerful lesson as a young reporter because we learned that, even when 20 people witness the exact same event, there will be 20 different opinions about what just happened, so you have to ask a lot of people the same questions to start to pull together an accurate picture of what happened. This was back in the 80s and no way in such a thing would fly now. Parents would lose their minds, but I will never forget that meeting. Story 27. Towards the very end of my pregnancy there were all sorts of jokes about who would do what if I went into labor at work, haha. All fun and games until I actually went into labor at our regular WED meeting. Luckily, real-life first kids take a lot longer to come out versus what you see on TV shows and movies. Pretty memorable meeting for sure. My anti-kids boss was relieved when I calmly got up and left to go to the hospital. Seriously, he thought the kid would be born right there in the conference room. Now there's a seriously memorable scenario for you. Story 28. We had a board meeting at a church where they also hold various other meetings. My friend walked into AA with a six-pack of beer, thinking it was our board meeting. Story 29. Well, not exactly a meeting, but in college I was meeting with my group for a project in one of the smaller libraries on campus. About halfway through I started having gas and thinking I could get away with it. The first I let out started as a squeaker, but I knew I couldn't hold it in much more. I just kinda relaxed and let it ride out. It sounded like a duck quacking underwater, a real chair smacker. Everyone within a 10-foot radius turned and looked and my group stared on in horror. I started laughing loudly and could not stop. Eventually I had to get up and walk out of the library still cackling. Later a few of my group members texted to see if I was okay. Good people. Story 30. I was in a Skype meeting with work. I have one of those aftermarket cameras that perch on top of the computer monitor. My kitten, the fluffy spawn of evil, decided that it was a good time to try and eat the camera. Fortunately she did not succeed. Everybody at work knows my cat's name now. Cat Tax Fluffy Evil. Story 31. Worked at a dog-friendly office, and we had an all-staff meeting, so about 20 people and probably about 8 dogs. HR is in the middle of a presentation, when a 30-pound dog corgi mix, so long and skinny with short legs, jumps up in an office desk chair sitting up by itself towards the front, and it starts spinning, and spinning, and spinning. It spun for over a minute and everyone lost it. The dog's face said this: "I've never laughed so hard in a meeting. Too late, so buried." But this one was a number of years ago. I was in Hamburg in a business meeting on a conference call with a team in New York. All of a sudden the guys in New York say we have to go. There's a plane coming and they drop the line. It took about 15 minutes before we all started getting texts that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. Our guys were one floor below where it hit. We found out later that they all survived only because they booked it from our call straight down the stairs. Story 32. Here is a fun interruption. During the end of the millennium tech boom, our company's stock was rising dramatically, and we were all anticipating hitting a price of 100 per share because round numbers with zeros are cool. When got there were cheers all around the office, except for some people in a meeting who did not know what had happened. I wrote 100 on a piece of paper and thumped it against the meeting room's interior window, and was satisfied to hear the everybody inside erupt in cheers. Story 33. I interrupted a meeting pretty badly once. I was supposed to meet my husband at work and then we both ride together to get lunch. My daughter was only 2 at the time and I loaded her up in a stroller and went inside my husband's work to wait in the lobby. Absolutely no one is supposed to get past the lobby unless you have the credentials. The woman at the front desk insisted I go back and ensured me it was fine. I went through the double doors with stroller and all these businessmen and women were just staring me down and giving me confused looks. I saw some more doors which I thought was my husband's office area. I pushed the doors open while struggling to get my stroller in. I look up and there's a big table full of people looking very baffled. There's a man standing up giving a PowerPoint slide and he asks if he could help me. I was so embarrassed that I just said no and tried to make a quick exit. The stroller wheels got stuck on the door and I'm in such a panic that I can't get the door open enough to get the stroller out. The man at the PowerPoint comes over to open the door wider and points me to the direction of security. Security lead me back to the lobby to wait on my husband. The poor woman at the front desk was fired and my husband's boss was not very happy about the incident. Story 34 names have obviously been changed. I was a Mormon missionary, and this woman we had been meeting with came to church with us. We'll call her Brianna. She's in the second row. My companion Swenson and a woman in the congregation named Janae are on either side of her in the pews. Janae catches Swenson's eye and nods to Brianna, who is slumped on her shoulder. Swenson smiles, thinking she fell asleep, then quickly realizes Brianna has passed out. There is some shuffling, and the branch president leader of a small congregation, who is an EMT, is sitting on the stand and notices something is up. So he walks over, checks a few things, and him and someone else in the congregation start to pick up Brianna. The person currently at the podium speaking is one of the people who oversees all the congregations in the area, and he's been a bit uncertain as things have been unfolding, and now he pauses mid-sentence and he's like, should I stop? Branch president's like, nah, you're good, we got it under control by this point. Someone had called an ambulance, and the branch president was taking care of the situation until they got there. Turns out she had diabetes and was having an insulin reaction. To this day, I don't know if we saved her life. She probably would have been alone at home if she didn't go to church, or if it happened because she missed a meal, and it's our fault for bringing her to church. Story 35. I once was in a private meeting discussing whether to hire an applicant. Someone realized they left a sheet of paper at their desk, got up and opened the door to go get it. As soon as the door was open, an uninvited manager fell through the doorway, had been right outside pressing his ear against the door to listen in. Story 36. Not sure if this counts, but a guy interrupted himself. I was working for Philips, the Dutch company that seemed to think they invented music CDs, and that this person invented the coding. Once a year there would be a meeting on how the company was doing, and they would roll this chap out for 30 minutes to give us engineers a presentation on what was happening in the future. He is known as being a bit odd, and capable of going off the rails into madness if he didn't keep to his pill-swallowing regime. He had some sort of personality disorder. Anyhow, 30 of us sat and listened to him burble on. At the end of it he said, "Any questions?" and was asked something about compression coding. He answered and said, "Any more?" And my friend John, who had a degree in maths, asked something mathematical about encoding. John did this to let us know he had a degree in maths. He liked to show off his intellectual firepower. I was peed off as we had a tea break coming up and this was delaying it. The genius launched into an answer that went on and on and on, covering the board with formula. After 10 minutes of frantic scribbling he stopped. He stood to one side and faced into a corner and said in a high piercing screechy voice, "What do you think of the girl in the front row, the one with the big," and then in a much deeper tone, "I like her, she's sexy." It went on screechy, "Yes, quite sexy." Deep, the fat one asked, "A good question, didn't he?" Screechy, "Yes, he might be our friend." Deep, "Yes, he might be our friend." Screechy, "Shut up now, we got work to do." We all just stared open-mouthed and looked at each other mortified. Then he went back to the board, and carried on as if nothing had happened. After 30 seconds more incomprehensible maths, with a final flourish he wrote QED, and turned around. "Any questions?" Story 37. Sitting in a meeting, boss asks, "So what is this all about?" Two coworkers, smiling like they just won the lottery, the hokey pokey. "Boss, what?" Coworkers, practically giddy with excitement, "The hokey pokey. You know, while doing the motions, put your right hand in, take your right hand out, put your right hand in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around, spin around in office chairs, that's what IT's all about." Story 38. I worked IT for a police department and was in a mid-shift briefing to trade out a couple of laptops for patrol cars that had open tickets the day before. All of a sudden the radios all beeped twice and there was a notice that all officers were to report to assigned school locations in our local area. The officers took off en masse, clearly knowing what to do. I just went back to my office because everyone took off so quick that I did not get the computers that needed serviced. About a minute after that my manager came in and told me that I should come to the break room because there was a massive school shooting in progress. This was the Columbine massacre. Story 39. This was a couple years ago at my old job. I work for a tech company, in a group that is 80 women. We were in the middle of a strategy meeting with our department director, second-level managers, and a couple of peons like me. I'm dialed in from a conference room with my boss and some other folks. Everyone's supposed to be on mute, but for some reason the meeting leader didn't mute all. 20 minutes into the meeting, someone is droning on about dependencies and risks and pilot requirements. I'm asking myself why I'm in this meeting. The speaker takes a breath to start her next point, and over the phone, a long, low, breathy moan echoes across the line, like the longest moan I've ever heard. Definitely a man. The whole call holds its breath. I, 24 and fresh out of graduate school and in my first big kid job, stare at the conference speaker in mute surprise and hold in a giggle. As I'm trying desperately not to laugh, my boss cracks up and suddenly the line is a cacophony of women losing their minds with laughter. After a minute or two, the call goes quiet, punctuated with stray giggles, and there's an awkward pause. Our department director says, "Gentlemen, I believe one of you needs to be on mute." Shuffling noise, then a beep. It was a WebEx call, so if someone had been looking at the participants list they would have seen who wasn't on mute. I never found out. Relieving, you'll never know what that moan was about. I'm gonna have to say it was the time that the general manager of my resort shot a rubber band across the room and it hit the wedding coordinator right between the eyes. It made for a very interesting staff meeting. Story 40. I've shared this before, so if it's a repeat, sorry, I just love this story. My last boss was an idiot, a straight-up incompetent buffoon, but she had a PhD which impressed the director enough that she got hired even though everyone on the interview committee thought she was a train wreck. At one point during her interview she veered off a question to tell us about how good yogurt is for you. Spoiler alert. This was an IT job and had all to do with yogurt, but it sets up what happens next. So we're in on a phone conference and it's me, idiot boss, my coworker, and some tech support people from the learning management system we were contracted with. They're talking about something to do with class scheduling and all of a sudden idiot boss blurts out, "You know, there's a certain tone that will just make you lose control of all bodily functions." Longest, awkward silence ever. After my coworker and I exchanged looks of horror, we were contorting our faces every way you can imagine, trying not to laugh hysterically. I finally had to step out for a minute. I think the tech guys had to mute the phone so they could laugh, and idiot boss just went on with the meeting like nothing had happened. TLDR meeting interrupted when boss suddenly veers from discussing online course scheduling to the brown note. Story 41. I was at a school board meeting once for work. The board is moving through the agenda in the typical boring way when some women got up and started screaming about how she has no kids and should not have to pay school tax. One of the board members was trying to tell her that the high-rated public schools increased her home value, but nope, she just kept screaming at the top of her lungs until the once super old security guard walked over and told her to leave or he would have to call the local police. Story 42. A friend of mine used to work at Wells Fargo, where his line of business would have quarterly conference calls with the CFO. While his spiraling addictions and absenteeism would have eventually gotten him fired, he managed to speed up the process by using a Charlie Sheen soundboard to publicly insult the CFO in front of thousands of colleagues. Story 43. I was applying to a corporate job. I was just out of college and kind of fresh to say the least, no experience in work at all, and just seeking for something better than a minimum wage job, pay me rent, pay back the college loans, etc. While I'm entering the building, it was a hella high skyscraper with glass windows. I hear someone loudly arguing and imprecating outside in what sounds like a foreign. I'm in a rush, so I don't take the time to look. Fast forward halfway through the meeting, and while I was talking about how I need the job and how I'm the right person for it and all that blabber to convince people, the window washer slowly rises from the window naked and smashes on the window, breaking it. At this point we were all standing up horrified by the sight. He jumps in and slides over the table in the style of Hazard and runs away from the door. Needless to say, the meeting was postponed that day.